Hey, what's up, YouTube world and the podcast world out there? Welcome to the Backmarkers F1 Show podcast. This is episode 136 here, and we are pleased to be bringing you this episode here on this Friday afternoon, by the time you guys are listening to this, of the release of the podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cato. Today, I've got only one of my fellow Backmarker hosts alongside me for this podcast, Mr. Tyler McDonald, joining us from Ottawa, Canada. Let's welcome him in now. Tyler, how you doing today?
Chris, good. It's nice to be back doing a podcast here, and lots of interesting storylines over the past, I guess, two races for us. But we'll focus more on the last race, the Miami GP. But it's been an interesting little few weeks in Formula One, and hopefully we could see maybe I'm going to hint at it, a little bit of change coming shortly to the grid. So or actually the results, hopefully, but. Yeah, other than that, all's good. How are things with you?
All is good here as well. Just came back just a few days ago, did a little bit of travels in the beautiful parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, visited Sarajevo and nice city of Mostar, which was very interesting. So yeah, it's kind of one of the perks about being situated in Europe is you can drive to these different places and it's not too far away. So I actually missed many of the Miami Grand Prix weekend and only really got to see qualifying and the race. So a couple of days passed, of course, the Miami Grand Prix. So we're going to talk a little bit about the race, and then we're also going to talk a little bit of other F1 stuff as well as we head into the next race at Imola. But Shaker couldn't be with us today. He is actually on a movie set and is very busy with his work, but he does send his greetings and his regards to our Backmarkers F1 fans out there. So we'll catch up with him on the next podcast. But Tyler, let's get into the 2023 Miami Grand Prix. And this race, I kind of feel, was really a divider amongst the fans because you kind of had one section of the F1 world that thought it was kind of a good race, a solid race, maybe not the most exciting, but still entertaining. And then you had the other half, which really disliked the race and was really kind of calling F1 for the problems that we've had this season with the discrepancy in the top gaps between the rest of the field, and they really didn't like it. So I'm interested about your take on this race. Where did you find it? Did you thought it was entertaining? Was it boring? How would you rate this Miami Grand Prix?
Well, if a driver in a car is watching TV as he's racing, Chris, I think that should tell you the entire story. I mean, Fernando Alonso was watching the race and was looking at Lance Stroll's overtakes on the big screens while driving a lap around Miami. So, in my opinion, it wasn't a great race. I mean, it was interesting to kind of see the different, I'd say, teammate strategies play out. Especially, I was interested in the Mercedes during the race, as well as the battle for the last points paying position with Kevin Magnussen holding on with Yuki Tsunoda and Lance Stroll very close behind. They had a nice little run near the end of the race, did Yuki and Lance. So, I mean, that's where most of my attention was paid to. Obviously, with Max charging up through the field, and I will touch on it quickly because it was a phenomenal job by Max. The way he managed the race, I think there's no doubt in that you can't say that the race was handed to Max. It wasn't. He did have to really fight for it, and he drove phenomenally on those hard set of tires, especially through the middle point of the race to set him up for an easier finish to the end of the race. So full credit to Max for having a phenomenal race. But that's just the talent he is, and we expect that out of Max Verstappen. Um, as you mentioned, with the gaps in the teams, I mean, it, of course, the championship is still very close with Perez and Verstappen. And with the winner, whoever would have won this race would have been top spot in the drivers' championship. But you do want to see, it almost looks like right now, Chris, we're not going to see another team win a race this season. And that's how I honestly feel about how far Red Bull are ahead. And, that's for me not good for Formula One. And sorry, I'm going on a rant here instead of letting you chime in. But
No, please
numbers
do.
came back. Numbers came back from the Miami GP for viewership in the United States, which is, reminder, key demographic for Liberty Media right now, wanting to grow the sport in the States, obviously with the three races. And yes, attendance was up over the entire weekend. They did raise attendance and it was up. However, I still saw a lot of empty seats, especially for practice and qualifying. And I was thinking to myself, sneaky opportunity, I might go down next year to catch the race there because, um, I mean, it's hard to get tickets in Canada. You can't get tickets in Canada, for the most part. So, I mean, that might be a good opportunity for us Canadians to go down and watch a race. But also at the same time, viewership, our TV viewership, I believe, was down in the U.S. and I think it was just the U.S. So don't quote me fully on that. For this race on a year-to-year mark compared to last year's race, and that's not a good sign for Formula One. And I think the main reason of this was the fact that we're seeing a championship battle that isn't really a battle right now, and it's kind of turning people away from Formula One, and that drive to survive kind of peak excitement is starting to go away a bit. We're seeing that hype train around Drive to Survive, even though it's still a great series, the hype train around it has gone down a bit as well. So it's a key year this year for Formula One to try and keep that viewership up over a race to race weekend, and they have to provide exciting races for that to happen.
And I'm so glad you brought up the viewing numbers because this was a topic that we are going to talk about on today's podcast. So just to fill into what Tyler was talking about there, just some of the specific numbers. This race was, of course, being shown in the United States on ABC as well, which is kind of the, I guess, parent company of ESPN as well. They're all owned by Disney. So the ABC network, the Miami Grand Prix earned a 0.9 rating and 1.646 million viewers for the full Miami window on Sunday, including the pre-race as well. That is down from a 1.08 rating plus 2.066 million viewers for the direct comparison from last year. So as you mentioned there, Tyler, they are definitely down a little bit in the numbers. And there were some mitigating factors there. You had the NBA playoffs on as well in that Sunday, NASCAR as well, which actually NASCAR pulled a little bit higher in some of the TV ratings that I saw as well. So,
And just to chime in on that NASCAR race, Chris, it was one of the best NASCAR races I've seen in a long time. It was a good weekend for NASCAR to have a race like that. It was a crazy, crazy race. If you get the chance to watch the highlights, I highly recommend doing it. Wild race. But anyways, continue.
yes, it was, and that's all probably part and part of the fact of why some of the Miami Grand Prix numbers were down. And this is a great question too, and I hope that people in the comments will chime in on this because are we starting to see the novelty of the U.S. market start to trail off here a little bit? This is only the second ever Miami Grand Prix. It's the first of 3 races in the United States this season, but I saw a lot of fans usually even more upset than I was because usually this is the stuff that I hate the most, the celebrity and the introductions, which I'm sure we can talk about later. I personally hate all that stuff just because I love the racing and I'm come to watch these drivers and I don't care for anything else in terms of that show. But a lot of people were really upset by the over Americanization of Formula One. And so I'm really wondering that with the lack of good racing this year, not just in the fact of an uncompetitive championship, but the racing itself has been gotten worse than in 2022 because the raising of the floor for 2023 has made following a little bit more difficult. I just feel that the racing in terms of wheel to wheel isn't as good either. And I think we're seeing that with the fans. The fans are getting really disinterested in the early parts of the season. And when we get back to Miami just as a whole, I just wanted to post this because it's so interesting. This came from Fastest Pit Stop here on Twitter. Tyler, you're thinking of going to the Miami Grand Prix next year. Definitely don't go for the hospitality food at the Miami Grand Prix because I'm just going to read off some of the prices here of some different foods that we have here. So, Tyler, if you want an empanada duo, you're going to be paying $350. Steam buns go for $300. You can get an F1 platter if you maybe go with somebody else for $500. Let's see, we got some chilled things to go here. How about a watermelon and tomatillo salad? $250. That sounds pretty good for that. How about some Maine lobster rolls? $450. So, what do you want to order there, Tyler? What can we afford?
We can afford a flight back to Canada, I think. That's about it. And that's just for the hospitality. That's not for like the general public, right? Like
That's correct. That is, I'm reading off. This is a hospitality menu. So obviously, but this is again the point too, right? Is that it's
still
catered
ridiculous.
to, yeah, it is very ridiculous. But that's kind of the whole ridiculousness of the Miami Grand Prix, and I think the F1 races in America in general, where they're really catering to the celebrities. Like I saw so many teams and the official F1 accounts just always posting about what celebrities are in the garages or on the pit lanes and stuff like that. And that's the problem, right? Is that these celebrities, and to a certain extent the Drive to Survive era, they might be around for a year or two, maybe even 3 years, but when they're gone, what other fans are going to be left if the hardcore ones are left out? And I think that we're starting to see that slowly here, because if you thought the Miami Grand Prix was bad in terms of the extracurricular activities, can you imagine what Las Vegas will be like?
I actually I'm really excited for Vegas, and there's a couple of reasons why. One, Christian Horner said the Vegas Grand Prix is going to be the biggest sports weekend ever, I believe is what he said. Is that a, I won't say quote unquote because I might be paraphrasing. But it was somewhere along those lines, or the greatest sporting event ever, something like that. So I'm excited to see what that hype is going to lead to. That's what I'm really excited, and I want to see what the track's going to race like as well. Like I will give it a chance. I'm not going to shut it out right away. If it provides great racing, then I'm all in. But at the same time, Vegas is a wild place, and I mean, I'm lucky enough. I've watched enough. I mean, Vegas got their hockey team, which hockey obviously is very big here in Canada, and in a lot, some of our listeners as well. I'm sure will follow hockey as well. But Vegas got a team recently, and they just do it differently there in Vegas. I mean, the in-game in event production is 5 times what everywhere else would be. It's going to be a crazy, crazy weekend. So if people thought Miami was going to be bad, I mean, Vegas is just going to be unbelievable. But maybe it'll be so unbelievable that it's good at the same time. Vegas, I haven't been disappointed in anything Vegas has done in terms of event experiences and or production or anything like that either. Um, they know how to do it right. And if anyone's going to do it right, it's probably going to be Las Vegas. So very keen. What's interesting is that they have one of the best racetracks in the world in Austin there still. I love the Austin GP and the way that track races. So I think that has to stay 100%. And I hope that they at least to keep that. Well, they will keep that. But I mean, 2 races, I think, in the US is more than enough for me. What are your thoughts on it?
I would agree as well. I think two is enough, because especially when we see historic Formula One countries, let's say, for example, as Germany, that has so many great racetracks, the fact that they don't have a race at all is pretty incredible. And other countries like France, too, for example. So I would say two for a maximum in the US is okay. Like I would be fine with that. You kind of have that hybrid street track, kind of made up track in Miami, but then you have a Grand Prix classic circuit in the circuit of the Americas, which I like. I like Austin. I think Austin has been a resounding success ever since it came onto the calendar. It's a great track, has provided us with some really solid races, and I just feel like in Texas you don't get that over kind of celebrity Hollywoodization of Formula One. Sure, you get your American celebs that come out there as well, but it just feels more like a classic Grand Prix weekend that we're used to as hardcore F1 fans. So all in all, I think that we all can tolerate the sort of extracurriculars that F1 puts on. But at the end of the day, the on track action has to deliver. And I think that we saw with the 2023 Miami Grand Prix, when the on track action didn't deliver, people really kind of gravitated toward criticizing all the extra other stuff that normally we would tend to tolerate more if, okay, at least the Grand Prix was exciting. But we had so many different things with this weekend. Like they introduced the driver introductions, for example, which if you're an IndyCar fan, for example, they do that at the Indy 500, sort of a tradition, but it's a very American thing, right? And we saw it at the 2017 U.S. Grand Prix. Formula One tried it, but this was really the first time that I heard a almost unanimous dislike from the drivers, except Lewis Hamilton, which I'm not surprised of why he would enjoy something like that. But all the drivers hated it. And Fernando Alonso, actually, I think it was Alonso who made the interesting comment about, why don't they do it at every race then? I mean, why is Miami or the US more important than the fans in Italy, for example, or the fans in Bahrain or any other places? I thought that was a very interesting comment. But the most important one, and I forget which driver it was, so comment below if you remember who it was, but they said that it was really annoying because it took away critical time pre-race that they would usually have with their engineers to just go over last minute procedures, maybe things that they picked up on the laps to the grid that they want to discuss with the team. And that time really got taken away from the drivers. And I think that stuff has to totally stop, because it's already ridiculous to me how much work Formula One drivers has to do in terms of media, people bugging them for photos, sticking microphones in their face 5 minutes before they get into the car. I think that stuff really needs to be stopped. And the drivers do have to, I think, speak up for themselves and really say, like, hey, we need this time for ourselves. This is our time to go and work, and we're about to do something very dangerous, and we need to focus. You need to get in the zone. We don't need all this extra stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I come from watching a lot of NASCAR, and I can't wait. The comments are going, "Well, you can't compare NASCAR to Formula One." Well, you can for the event production stuff, if you want to say, because NASCAR does it right and does it to, I'd say, one of the best sports leagues to do it in the world. They just have it down to a science. But I mean, they do driver intros for every single race. Again, not excluding anyone, but they do it much before the race, before the countdown to grid. They do it, the drivers do what they do is they do the driver intros, and then they hop on a car or a truck or whatever, and do a lap of the track and wait for the fans, and then they go to their garages and to their haulers, whatever, and get ready for the race. So if Formula One were to do that, a great way to do it was be before the formation lap. Do all this stuff before the formation, because it was after the formation lap. Oh, not formation lap. Sorry, the lap to the grid to whatever they warm. What do they call that?
I think that's it. Laps to the grid, warm up. Yep.
Just laps to the, yeah. So yeah, sorry. So laps to the grid. Do it before that, so the drivers, the cars aren't even on the track anymore. You can actually put the stage on the track, and because where it was in the pit lane, I believe, right?
Honestly, I don't even know.
Yeah,
I
I'm
only
trying to
caught the last
remember.
five drivers.
Oh, okay, I'm trying to remember where exactly it was. I might be wrong, so comment below if I am. But like you can actually put it on the track before the cars are even out there. The drivers do the little introduction, and then they hop down and they go back into the garage and get ready for their lap to the grid. And then after that, they still have kind of the normal procedure of, even though microphones are in their faces, they have time with their engineer before the race. So I think that would be a great solution. I think they should do it at every race. It goes off hitch free by NASCAR. They don't do a crazy huge production about it. They set up a little stage. Drivers walk up. They introduce, driving the number 7 Ferrari car. It's Kimi Räikkönen, or like from Finland, it's Kimi Räikkönen, for example. And then Kimi does a little wave, shows the sponsors off, and that's about it. It's nice and easy. So I think it's was overdone for Miami, but can be done a lot better and should be done for every single race. And that's probably an unpopular opinion, but
And that's fine, but they just have to make that decision and organize it far better. I think the drivers more had a problem with that, the organization. And they said, okay, if you're going to do it at every race, but you do it properly, like you just suggested. And keep in mind, they also have the drivers' parade as well. So I think you have to pick one or the other instead of
to do
doing,
it before the drivers parade, like
yeah.
exactly how NASCAR does it, where that's what it is, a driver's parade. They go and they hop into their little car or the back of the pickup truck and wave to the fans. That's their driver's parade. So the intro is before the driver's parade. So you can do it before then. It's a great way to introduce the drivers before you're about to see them drive around the track.
And you don't have to
Seems good.
televise that too. I mean, it's on the
Yep.
F1 TV coverage, for example, but if you're just
Mhm.
tuning into the race, you'll just see the race. So that's
Yep.
more for the fans at the track, right? They get kind of a close-up view of their drivers outside of the cockpit. So I like that. But yeah, that's a good idea. You could do the intro straight into the drivers parade, and then afterwards, the drivers are free to do their preparations for the race. So yeah, I think that was a big critique there, that from the drivers and fans as well. So we'll see what it's going to be like for Vegas and for Austin if they're going to do it. I highly doubt they'll do it for any of the European races, but I think it's something specific to America for for obvious reasons. So that was kind of the extracurriculars. But getting back into the race itself, I watching it, I said, it was actually kind of a decent race. It was certainly not the most exciting, certainly not the most boring either. But I thought that we had a lot of overtakes, that's for sure. Now, the issue with the race that I had was that they kept cutting to a lot of overtakes and battles. Of course, we have Verstappen coming through the field. We had some decent overtakes in the midfield as well. The problem was that, especially at the end of the race, when we got to see that it was clear Verstappen was going to win, it was very anticlimactic because we thought we'd get much more of a battle between the two Red Bulls. So I think that was the problem, is a lot of the overtaking was done on DRS, wasn't many, overtakes under braking. And just the fact that we knew that, okay, Red Bull is going to win, that was kind of one of the reasons why it really hurt the race. The same problem as we had in Azerbaijan as well. So you said earlier that you don't see any team other than Red Bull winning this year. Certainly looks like that at the moment. I think maybe we're looking towards Monaco, where the Aston Martin in the hands of Fernando Alonso might be able to pull off a shock. I hope so, at least. But it's certainly looking that way, because the two teams that have really disappointed me this season, really one specifically, has been Ferrari, just because they have regressed so far from 2022. I can't even really believe it. And after Miami, it just looked even worse. And, Mercedes as well, they're about kind of started the same way as they did 2022. But looking how they finished last season, I thought they'd be getting off to the start much faster in 2023. And they haven't done that either. And Aston Martin has taken over that number 2 spot. So that's just been the disappointing thing for me, is we're only 5 races into the season, and we already know who's going to win the championship in terms of the constructor. And with all due respect to Sergio Perez, I believe he will be much closer this season. But Verstappen again showed why he's a unanimous favorite for this title this year again.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Chris. It's been very disappointing, especially like you said, from Ferrari. I mean, they were almost non-existent this past weekend, and I like obviously a couple of big mistakes from Charles, who showed a pretty decent pace, I'd say, throughout the race, and I think could have maybe challenged for, well, 100% would have challenged for a podium, but could have challenged for second, I think. I mean, there was really interesting if he were to start it up there. But it obviously, for the 2 crashes he made, mistakes that he made, obviously that didn't happen. So, it's been very disappointing. And Mercedes, you would hope, would bounce back a lot better than what they have as well. So, Red Bull's just, absolutely killing it, doing it right, and you can't blame them for it. I mean, what are you going to say? They're ruining the sport. I mean, we had Mercedes dominate for so long as well. It's both sides of the coin here. And maybe what needs to happen is the FIA kind of put those sanctions like they did on Mercedes near the end of their reign, and try to limit Red Bull's advantage, which, I mean, obviously if you're Red Bull, you're not going to like, but again, you have to think of the sport as a whole in general and the healthiness of it.
And it's really tough for us fans too, because we had such an amazing 2021 season with a full season long close battle, and not just between the championship leaders, but also throughout the field. We had a lot of different drivers scoring podiums, some surprise pole positions as well. That kept it entertaining. Then we moved into 2022 with this new era, a lot of optimism. We started the year off fantastically, close battles between Leclerc and Verstappen, closer racing. We thought, wow, this is great. And then it just all really fell apart. And then 2023, again, you come with that new optimism to say, okay, we think Ferrari's going to take that step closer. Red Bull has some penalties with the aerodynamic restrictions that they have. Mercedes finished the season so strong at 2022. And then within the span of like 2 to 3 races, everything, again, you get disappointed as a fan, and you really try and look for the positives. The only positives for me in 2023 have been, of course, Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin. They've kept it really exciting to me. And I'll have to be honest with you guys, they're really one of the only reasons why I'm tuning in to watch these races, because I'm just enjoying how well Alonso is driving. Not just the fact of how he's driving on track, but just the little comedic bits like you saw in Miami, for example, where he's like, oh, nice move by Lance into turn 1. And just these little funny kind of quirky things on the radio, but just shows how much fun he's having. So he's kind of saving this season for me. I hope that as we get after the summer break, and maybe we start to finally see Red Bull feeling the restrictions with the penalties, but I don't know at this point. I mean, I hate to be that person on this podcast. I know we're supposed to keep you guys, optimistic and hopeful about this season, but I think we have to just face the reality at this point. And we've experienced this before. This is very reminiscent to me of the 2019 season, where Mercedes, I think, started the first 7 races of the year with the 1-2 finish. and we all knew what happened after that.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And maybe it's the fans that need to be optimistic and get us on the other side this time instead of us trying to keep everyone optimistic too, because I have the same feelings, Chris. And we saw, like you said, this play out in 2019 and look how it ended. It was a tough one for everyone. And it's in terms of, viewing, it wasn't tough for Mercedes. So it's going to be interesting to see how these next few races kind of move on and what the summer break can do. I mean, with all that that wind tunnel time that Aston Martin still have, can they hit that next step? Can they make a couple upgrades that will make the back half of the season interesting? And will Alonso get a race win? I'm honestly, yeah, like you said, I'm tuning in to see if Alonso's going to win a race. It's pretty much all I'm tuning in for as well. So um, it helps that I'm Canadian and we're Canadian and wanted to see the Canadian team. I'm calling it a Canadian team do well with Aston Martin, so that also plays a factor.
It sure does, because where would we be without Aston Martin? Let's say if Aston Martin was, where they were last season, and man, it would be even more boring. But it's been like that for all the teams. I was looking at a comparison of the standings from the top five this season at this point and last season at this point, and mostly all the teams are doing worse. I think Mercedes are the only ones that are kind of level of where they are, but all the other teams like McLaren have got fewer points. Ferrari certainly have fewer points. Alpine, all these different teams have much fewer points than last season. So it's just kind of been a rough start to F1 in 2023. But let's hope. We've got a string of a triple header coming up. We got Imola, Monaco, and Spain. Very interesting with the Monaco one in the middle there. I think, again, chance for maybe a shock result there in Monaco. But Imola and Spain, I think, are going to be very favorable to Red Bull as well. So let's see. It's we got a lot of races to go. There's a lot of chances for this thing to turn around, but unfortunately, that's the most disappointing part. Is realistically looking at it, even as an expert in the sport, if it wants to look at it, or even just as a fan like us, you can tell that there's no other team right now who can challenge for the championship. That I can tell you the most. So we'll see. But maybe some of my final thoughts on the Miami Grand Prix, and then I'll get yours, and then we can kind of wrap up this podcast slowly. I made a quick video about this actually just the other day because Yuki Tsunoda has been a driver who's really impressed me this season, but has flown under the radar. And you got another P11 in Miami. Just had some brilliant overtakes too, that some of which we didn't get to see on the live feed. But Tsunoda, I think, was had a really another solid race again. 2-point scores in 2023, P10 in Azerbaijan and Australia. Very close to the points this time around, but just couldn't get it. But it's a good result for him just because AlphaTauri is kind of in this limbo situation of they might even get sold. They just lost their team principal. They're going to get a new one for next season. And then Nick De Vries is on the hot seat. And I got to give an apology to Yuki Tsunoda because I was one of the guys at the beginning of the season that said, Yuki Tsunoda is going to have to watch his seat in 2023 because Nick De Vries is coming. He's going to take over the team, reigning Formula or former Formula E F2 champion as well. But I was completely wrong because De Vries has had a really rough go of it so far.
Yeah, it put me in the same boat as you, because I had the exact same mentality. And you're right. I honestly haven't really noticed Sonoda, but you're right. Looking at his results, it is a sneaky good performance from Yuki, compared to, especially relative to his teammate right now. So, no, kudos to Yuki. And I saw some positives for Alpine as well. The double points finish here in Miami, and I thought Esteban and Pierre Gasly both had very good races themselves. Um, so it's nice to see that kind of mid pack. We're seeing a little bit of hope there for in terms of some good stories coming out, and hopefully Yuki can make the best of what's been a very good start to a season for him, and kind of proving that, hey, no, I have the talent to be able to be the number one driver at a Formula One team.
And you mentioned Alpine there. That's a kind of a perfect segue. I'm not sure if you've seen some of the comments from Alpine CEO Laurent Rossi, basically called out his team saying it's unacceptable the start that they've had and the kind of the run of form that they've been on, and that things need to change quickly or else changes will be made in essence, just paraphrasing what he said. But what are your opinions on that from the CEO of a team to kind of call out his team managers, to call out the rest of his employees so publicly like that? And especially for a team like Alpine, because I think that Laurent Rossi, I think, has to take a lot of accountability as well. When you look at the turbulence that that team has gone through in the last few years, it's no reason Fernando Alonso left Alpine, and there's no reason that Oscar Piastri left for McLaren as well, because Alpine has had a very rough start to this season as well. But what do you make of him calling out the team like that in such a public fashion?
It's a wake up call for everyone. You could call out your team via a team meeting at your garage or your factory, I should say, or you have all these meetings or emails or whatever it is. But when you go out to the media in public, you mean business, and basically it's put up or shut up at this point. We see this with sports teams, throughout different leagues. When their manager calls out the team in public, everyone's like, "Oh my God, something's really going on behind the scenes." And usually, there's a good reaction in terms of bounce back by the team. And we'll see if that's the case with Alpine. Obviously, it's a little harder with Formula One. You can't just like bounce back and all of a sudden you're P4 or five. You have that to make that development with the parts and making sure you have the right setups and all that stuff as well. But in the end, Chris, it all stems from the top. And if the job isn't getting done right, major changes are going to be made. Well, maybe the major change needs to be made at the top. Who knows? Um, Obviously, none of us are inside the Alpine factory. We have no clue what's going on or what the dynamics are, or what's underperforming, and maybe there's a certain section that he's calling out that he didn't do publicly, but is also secretly, everyone inside the team knows that's who he's calling out. So, lots of to read into there, and I think a lot of answers that won't be answered until later on this season. Maybe midway through the season, when we start seeing potentially some people being let go, or we start seeing Alpine turn around and have a phenomenal second half season for them.
Otmar Safnauer could be on the hot seat once again. I mean, he's just recently joined the team not that long ago. Could be a team principal change, but you never know. I agree with what you just said there too. I think you have to maybe look from the top for the accountability, because you see the path that Alpine has been on. But I think the decisions from Alonso and Piastri have been vindicated. And we see obviously the success Aston Martin is having versus the season that Alpine is having. Make up your own opinions from that as well. So, do you have anything else, Tyler, that you want to discuss? Maybe not even related to the Miami Grand Prix, something you maybe saw in the F1 world that you wanted to discuss?
No, nothing as of late. I mean, I think we're trying to figure out who Honda is going to line up with during the next engine kind of shuffle, I don't know, regulation that comes out. So that's just something I'm keeping an eye on, and I'm slowly keeping an eye on, this whole Andretti Motorsports, if that's actually going to be a thing coming up. It's been really quiet for on both those teams' fronts, along with um, um, Chevrolet entering. It's been a little bit Chevrolet GM, I should say, entering. That's been a little quiet on that front as well. Along with potentially an extra team coming in. Everything along that has been very quiet. So I'm slowly just keeping my eye on and listening to that stuff, and hopefully we have some more news coming out about potential team changes or engine changes or alignments that will be happening in the future. So I mean, that's what I'm keeping interest about. I mean, the state of what's going on right now on track.
Yeah, you're right. I haven't seen much on that front pretty much since the preseason when we first initially talked about it. So not much news to go on there. But yeah, I haven't really seen much either following the Miami Grand Prix. Just a couple of things here and there in terms of team performance and upgrades. And I think we're going to see more upgrades coming at the next race, of course, at the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix at the Imola circuit. And then as we head toward into Monaco as well, which of course Monaco, very specific track, so we're going to see maybe slightly the teams be closer in terms of performance, but I think that Barcelona is going to be another exaggeration of the gap between Red Bull and the rest of the field as well. So not much else going on in the F1 world, but that's why we wanted to bring this podcast to. I know it is much later than usual following the race, but still, it's this is the only time we can sync our schedules with our situation. So we appreciate everybody sticking to us with the channel, and all of you guys who have followed us. And yeah, Tyler, if you don't have anything else, then we could wrap up for episode 136.
Yeah, just excited for Imola because I just love that track. So I always love seeing F1 cars race around that track. So I will be tuning in no matter what, just because I love watching the spectacle of F1 cars around Imola.
Me as well. I really enjoy that track, and I'm super happy that they kept it on the calendar since they first brought it in a few years ago. So a great track, and hopefully one day we'll be able to go in person as well, because I think it's in a beautiful area of Italy as well, and the track itself is very historical. So it'd be nice to go. But yep, that'll do it for us then on episode 136, the Backmarkers F1 Show podcast, guys. We'll hopefully be with you after the Imola Grand Prix, breaking down the action, all three of us with Shaker as well. But you can always keep tabs on what we're doing. We are on YouTube, guys. So whether you're listening to us on an audio platform or if you're watching on YouTube, you can head over to our YouTube channel, The Backmarkers F1 Show. And that is where you're going to find all of our content throughout the season, whether we're doing race previews, analysis videos, and also go to the Shorts tab on the YouTube channel, because I've started to just post little short videos on different things happening in the F1 world, maybe on an off week where it's a little bit quieter in the news, but we'll still throw up a video every now and again. And make sure to enable those notifications, and that way you can never miss when we post a video. And same as all across the social media platforms: Instagram, BMF1Show, Twitter, BMF1_show. You can follow us there for all of our latest updates. Don't hesitate to comment down below on anything that we talked about in this podcast, any suggestions that you might have for content you'd like to see in the future, and any other F1 related questions that you might have. Please comment down below, subscribe, like, all the good things. Tyler, thank you very much for joining me on today's episode. We missed Shaker for today, but always glad to catch up with you and talk some F1. Always a good time.
Oh, I always love talking F1, and especially with you, Chris. So it's always good to get together, and hopefully we'll have a lot more interesting stuff to talk about in future races here.
Absolutely. Fingers crossed for a non-Red Bull winner for the next one or the
Yeah.
next three, but we'll see what happens, guys. All right. I hope everyone has an excellent day wherever you are in the world. Take care of yourselves. We will be seeing you soon for the next edition of the Backmarkers F1 Show podcast. For Tyler McDonald, Chris Cato, and for Shaker Barty, we appreciate all the support. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. It's bye for now.